The night began like any other: quiet streets, steady traffic, and a cool wind that rolled through the city as people settled into their evening routines. But at exactly 9:47 p.m., the calm shattered. A frantic 911 call came in from a distressed neighbor, reporting screams echoing through a normally peaceful apartment complex. The caller described hearing a loud crash, followed by a silence so sudden and unnatural it sent chills through the phone line. Dispatchers immediately sent units to the scene, unaware they were about to walk into one of the most puzzling and disturbing cases the town had ever witnessed. When officers arrived, they found the front door to Unit 3B slightly ajar. Inside, the living room looked frozen in the middle of chaos: furniture pushed aside, a lamp shattered, and personal belongings scattered across the floor. Yet, despite the signs of a struggle, one detail stood out above everything else: the complete absence of the apartment's tenant. 27-year-old Alyssa Marek. Her phone was still charging on the couch, her wallet untouched on the counter, and her car parked exactly where it always was. It was as if she had vanished between one breath and the next. Investigators canvassed the building, interviewing neighbors who described Alyssa as friendly, responsible, and not the type to disappear suddenly. One neighbor recalled hearing a male voice arguing with her earlier that evening. Another swore she saw someone unfamiliar lingering near the complex hours before, but nothing was immediately conclusive. There were no witnesses to an actual abduction, no security footage capturing her exit, and no trace of forced entry within hours. The apartment was sealed off, the missing person alert was issued, and the first stage of panic spread through the community. Alyssa's family arrived on scene overwhelmed with fear, pleading for answers the investigators did not yet have. What happened inside Unit 3B would become the first piece of a dark, twisting story, one that would grow more alarming with every new detail uncovered. By the next morning, the search for Alyssa intensified. Detectives returned to the apartment, this time accompanied by forensic specialists who scanned every inch for anything that might indicate where she went or who took her. What they discovered began to shift the investigation from a missing person case towards something far more sinister. Under the broken lamp, investigators found a thin smear of blood trailing toward the hallway. It was small enough to miss in dim lighting, but under forensic examination, it revealed itself as the first physical sign of violence. Near the doorway, a partial muddy footprint was lifted, though it lacked enough detail to make an immediate match. Even more unsettling was the discovery of a second set of fingerprints on Alyssa's kitchen counterprints that did not belong to anyone living in or visiting the apartment, according to initial interviews. Meanwhile, her phone was analyzed for recent activity. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary: no suspicious calls, no strange messages. But one thing was clear: her last outgoing text was sent at 9:44 p.m., just 3 minutes before the 911 call. Investigators couldn't determine whether she had time to send it willingly, or whether it was typed in a moment of fear. Detectives delved into her personal life. They interviewed friends, co-workers, and family members, trying to piece together whether Alyssa had enemies, unresolved conflicts, or troubled relationships. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Over the past few weeks, Alyssa had mentioned feeling watched. She told a co-worker she had seen the same gray sedan circling her block on multiple nights. She also hinted she believed someone had tried to get into her apartment a month prior. Though nothing was stolen, these comments raised immediate alarms. Investigators began to consider the possibility that Alyssa had been targeted. If so, this wasn't a random crime, it was premeditated. Someone had been tracking her, watching her, waiting for the moment to strike. The second section of the investigation closed not with answers, but with a chilling realization: someone had been preparing for this night long before it happened. And that person might still be nearby. As detectives pieced together Alyssa's recent concerns, they identified the first real potential suspect: a man named Evan Rourke, a former coworker who had been dismissed from their workplace after multiple reports of harassment. Alyssa had been one of the employees who spoke up against him. While there was no documented threat, Investigators learned that Evan had continued sending her unsolicited messages long after his termination. Messages she quietly ignored and deleted. When detectives attempted to locate him, they discovered something that raised even more suspicion. Evan had abruptly left town 2 days earlier. He told his landlord he would be gone for a while and failed to return his apartment keys. His absence alone wasn't proof of guilt, but it added a troubling dimension to the case, tracking his movements. Police located surveillance from a convenience store on the night of the disappearance. At 8:30 p.m., Evan was seen purchasing gloves, rope, and 2 bottles of water, items detectives deemed highly concerning given the circumstances. However, the footage also showed him driving north after leaving the store, not south toward Alyssa's neighborhood. This created a frustrating conflict in the timeline. In parallel, investigators continued interviewing people in Alyssa's personal circle. One friend revealed that Alyssa had recently blocked an unknown number that repeatedly called her at odd hours. Phone company records identified it as a prepaid burner phone with no subscriber information. More importantly, the last call attempted from that number occurred at 9:38 p.m., just minutes before the screams were heard. As officers followed these threads, someone else emerged as a person of interest, a neighbor from the floor below, a man known for late-night arguments and suspicious behavior. Residents reported hearing multiple altercations from his unit, though none had ever been formally reported. When questioned, he appeared nervous and evasive, claiming he was asleep the whole night. Despite audio-captured noises from his apartment at the precise time of the incident. By the end of Section 3, detectives found themselves juggling 2 very different leads, one pointing toward a man with motive and history, and the other toward someone shrouded in secrecy but with no clear connection to the victim. The case was widening instead of narrowing, and the pressure to find Alyssa alive was growing by the hour. 4 days into the investigation, a critical breakthrough finally arrived. A city worker conducting routine drainage maintenance discovered a discarded backpack, lodged inside a storm grate 2 miles from Alyssa's apartment. Inside the bag were several items confirmed to belong to her: a journal, a sweater, and a keychain she carried everywhere. But the most important piece of evidence was a crumpled receipt from a gas station timestamped at 10:12 p.m., less than 30 minutes after the 911 call. Detectives immediately reviewed the station's surveillance footage. What they found sent shockwaves through the command room. The camera captured a male figure wearing a black hoodie and gloves driving Alyssa's car. His face was partially concealed, but the body type and posture bore similarity to one of the earlier suspects. Even more disturbing was the moment he exited the vehicle. He glanced directly toward the camera, as if checking whether anyone would notice. This new evidence forced detectives to reevaluate the timeline. It confirmed Alyssa had not left on foot. Someone else drove her car. The backpack's location also suggested a deliberate attempt to throw off investigators by scattering belongings. Forensic teams processed the car. When it was eventually located abandoned near an industrial park, inside, they found long strands of blonde hair consistent with Alyssa's, along with a single drop of blood on the passenger door handle. More importantly, they discovered a smudge of dirt embedded with tiny metal shavings, a clue that suggested the suspect's potential workplace or hiding spot involved machinery. Detectives mapped all industrial sites within the area, cross-referencing employee records with the previously identified suspects. As they did, one troubling match surfaced: a maintenance technician with access to all buildings in the industrial zone, known for erratic behavior and multiple restraining order attempts filed by women in the past. His name had not appeared in the investigation before, but now he was the strongest lead they had. The investigation had shifted again, and for the first time, detectives believed they were closing in on the person who took Alyssa, with mounting evidence pointing toward the maintenance technician. Mark Hensley. Detectives obtained a warrant to search his rented storage unit on the edge of the industrial district. The unit had been closed off for months, and neighbors often complained about strange chemical smells emanating from the building. When officers pried open the metal door, the sight inside confirmed their worst fears. The space was cluttered with tools, tarps, and discarded clothing. In the center sat a wooden workbench covered with zip ties, duct tape, and various mechanical parts. Forensic experts immediately began collecting evidence, but one item stood out: a silver bracelet engraved with Alyssa's initials. It was undeniable proof she had been there. Moments later, detectives found fresh tire marks behind the building and a muddy boot print matching the size and pattern discovered earlier in her apartment. The pieces were finally connecting. But the biggest discovery was still ahead. Behind a false wall, officers located a small makeshift room. Inside was Alyssa, exhausted, injured, but alive. She had been held captive for days, forced into silence by fear and Mark's threats. The moment officers entered, she broke into tears, repeating the same words: "I didn't think anyone would find me." Alyssa provided a chilling account of that night. She explained how Mark had been stalking her for weeks. He watched her daily routine, learned her entry codes, and finally broke into her apartment. She tried to fight back, knocking over the lamp and furniture, but he overpowered her and forced her into her own car. She remembered him mentioning that no one listens to women like her, a phrase that sent shivers down investigators' spines. Mark was found hours later attempting to flee across state lines. He was arrested without incident, though he refused to answer any questions. Prosecutors swiftly filed charges for kidnapping, assault, unlawful confinement, and attempted murder. Detectives who worked the case described it as one of the most emotionally taxing investigations of their careers, but also one of the most triumphant. Because despite the terror, despite the chaos, Alyssa survived. Alyssa's rescue brought immediate relief to her family and community, but the emotional recovery was only beginning. She spent several days in the hospital under close medical supervision, surrounded by loved ones who had prayed for a miracle. The physical injuries were treatable. The bruises, cuts, and exhaustion would heal with time. But the psychological trauma would take far longer. Still, Alyssa showed the same resilience that helped her survive captivity. Determined not to let her story end in fear, the trial of Mark Hensley began 3 months later. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: the bracelet found in his storage unit, surveillance footage of him driving Alyssa's car, DNA traces recovered from the apartment, and Alyssa's own harrowing testimony. The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours before returning unanimous guilty verdicts on all major charges. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he could never target another woman again. The case sparked widespread public conversation about stalking, safety, and early warning signs. Alyssa's community organized events, fundraisers, and awareness campaigns, all aiming to strengthen protections for potential victims. Several neighbors admitted they had noticed Mark's unsettling behavior around the industrial area but never reported it. That realization became a painful reminder of how danger often hides in plain sight. For investigators, the case became a sobering lesson in perseverance. The early days were filled with dead ends, conflicting leads, and frustrating gaps. Yet every small clue, from a smeared bloodstain to a discarded backpack, guided them toward the truth. Their efforts not only saved Alyssa's life, but also brought closure to a family that had feared the worst. As for Alyssa, she began rebuilding her life step by step. She credited her survival to the people who refused to stop looking, and later joined advocacy groups supporting other survivors of violent crime. Her strength inspired thousands, transforming her from a victim into a symbol of hope and resilience. Her story stands as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can break through and justice, though often delayed, can still prevail.